Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have Harshit Omar. Harshit, if you want to give a little bit of background on yourself and your company to kick things off.
Hey, hi, Tony. Yeah, sure. My name is Harshit Omar. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Fluid Cloud. Um, my background is like any software developer, like heavy engineering background. I love to try new technologies, love to try all the hard problems, solve hard problems. So I have played around with cloud APIs all my life, and figured tried from the software side of things, tried to build automations in DevOps world, solve a lot of hard DevOps problems actually. So Fluid Cloud was the was born because to solve this particular one of the DevOps problems of cloud portability. People do use multiple clouds, and in terms of cloud customer deployments or
Right.
merger and acquisitions. And at any given point in time, it takes years to develop skill set for one particular cloud, and then you have to suddenly start using that other cloud, and then you have to bump up your skill set to an advanced level of understanding that newer cloud. So these are all very hard problems. So that is where Fluid Cloud wanted to solve that problem of cloud portability. In fact, even if with the people try to do that with multiple teams, but Terraform and APIs are keep on changing, right? So it's very hard to keep up. So there,
Well,
Fluid Cloud was born.
it's an interesting time to live through because, like, I mean, once upon a time I worked in the trenches side of things as a network
Mhm.
admin and IT admin and security analyst and so I came up in an era where a switch was a physical thing and a router was a physical thing and a server was a physical thing, and everything was physical. And now, like, all of those things can just be software defined, which really, it
Yeah.
that has tremendous potential in terms of flexibility, scalability, et cetera. It also comes with some downsides in terms of complexity and sort of chaos, because at least
Yes.
when I was deploying servers and routers and switches, I knew exactly where they were and they weren't going anywhere, and it was going to stay that way until I changed it. But today, like, your network infrastructure can change minute to minute.
Yes. I mean, that is true. And with AI, like there's every quarter you feel like, oh, you're like your knowledge is outdated at the moment, right? So and each cloud providers are also like trying to keep up the pace and keep the competition with it, coming up with newer and newer capabilities, newer services to try to ease the DevOps and make things even smoother. But in the end, they end up like creating more and more constraints, more and more complexities. uh, so yeah, when it comes to virtual infrastructure, right, as you said, physically there's more predictability. When it comes to deploying things on a public cloud, predictability and is very less, because sometimes what happens, the documentation says some things, but then when you do, it doesn't work. It is behaving
Right.
different, right? So
Well, like I
yeah.
said, that is it's a double-edged sword anyway,
Yes.
either way, because yes, there's more predictability or stability in being able to say, okay, I know exactly, like, I've
Yeah.
deployed this physical architecture. Um, but with that comes the downside of, not being able to just scale quickly, and like, some other things. So it does go both ways. Um, I was going to say, like, especially now, like, 10 years ago, this wasn't the case, but now, when companies are startups, um, they tend to be, cloud first, and talk about things from a cloud first perspective. But even startups that talk about being cloud first still often struggle with complexity, cost, operational
Yeah.
friction. Um, what do you think? Like, what do you see as the kind of the biggest disconnect between the promise of the cloud and like what companies want to be when they say they're cloud first and the reality that they're encountering.
So it all boils down to like following a DevOps hygiene, best practices, right? If you have everything good, but still, as you said, right, there are infrastructure is not just in like plain infrastructure. It is a whole ecosystem. Once you have the cloud infrastructure, then you have to take care of the cost management, then you have to take care of the security analysis and security posture of it, and then keeping up with that, keeping up with the scale and demand, continue to support the performance. And it, for a one particular in person to master all three of that, it's super hard. It takes years, right? So that is the basis of Fluid Cloud. Like you can never find a DevOps who is expert in multiple clouds. It's very rare to find. And then even if you find one, those people are very rare and very valuable. Even if you find one, they will be not having all the aspects. They will not have expertise on how to make it secure or how to make it cost optimized or how to make it performant, right? So that was the basis, and then we kind of based on that, we understand these are infrastructure patterns. You might, for somebody, cost will be an important thing. So for somebody, security will be an important thing. But how to bring out a balance, right? To bring out that infrastructure pattern which can balance out all these things. So based on that, we have actually worked on build our own ground up model which understands the infrastructure. We call it LIM, not LLM, but an LIM, large infrastructure model, and that helps DevOps really, really well in their existing workflows. And we use that using our mapping technology, which we developed between the cloud APIs. So multi-cloud management needs really mean that you can actually easily manage multiple clouds. It doesn't mean that you have one application running in one cloud, another in another cloud. That means I'm multi-cloud. No, that same application should be able to run in every cloud without increasing efforts, and that's what Fluid Cloud does. You give us an application, we can give you all those cloud native APIs, port it into another cloud, give you the Terraforms. You can do deploy on your own by your own, or you want Fluid Cloud to deploy, whatever it is. And if you want to then continue to optimize it based on cost, security, performance, you can also do that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I this is not it's not a direct comparison analogy, but like when I was at EDS and we were doing managed antivirus for clients, like for Fortune 100 clients, and the way we had it set up was we had a pretty small team, but at the time, and I'm dating myself here, but at the time, there were basically four major choices for enterprise grade anti-malware. It was Symantec, McAfee, CA, and Trend Micro. And the way we set the team up was we all kind of knew a little bit about all of them, but we had designated sort of experts for like and we paired it off. So like I was like the primary on Trend Micro with a secondary on McAfee, and then someone else would be a primary on Symantec with a secondary on Trend Micro, so we could kind of backfill each other. But as you were talking about the different clouds, it kind of reminded me of that approach, because like fundamentally antivirus was antivirus. I mean, they all worked on fundamentally the same premise.
Correct.
But there was still a nuance to it. There was still a nuance to knowing, okay, well, how exactly does Trend Micro do this, and how exactly does McAfee do this? And I think you deal with the same kind of thing here, where it's like on a foundational level, the cloud is the cloud. You're going to have kind of the same things, but you really need to have like an expertise in like, okay, well, how does Google Cloud do it as opposed to how AWS does it, as opposed to how Azure does it, and those types of things. I think another example I would point to would be the difference between operating systems. Like I'm just between Windows and Mac OS. Like
yes,
I've used both. I remember when it was much more of a religious debate about which one was the best one, and having used both, what I learned was they both have like kind of the same headaches. They just have different names for the headaches. And so it's like, so it's more, it's not so much a matter of one being significantly better or worse, but you need to
Yes,
learn the nuance of it. You need to learn the nomenclature that one uses versus the other,
correct.
and how to optimize that particular operating system. But in the end, they're sort of the same. They're just different enough to add complexity.
Correct, correct, and that's those are really great examples, Tony. Like, I mean, you nailed it really well because that's what exactly happens with cloud, right? Because every cloud provider has certain pros and certain cons, right? And how do you take best out of everything? And coming back to that example of OS, both have different ways of doing things, but for an end user, you can get things done. There are people who can get things done on Windows. There are people who can get things done on Mac. Same way, every cloud provider has the similar infrastructure as a service like offerings, IaaS, and there are some bunch of PaaS offerings. There might be some good and bad in between the clouds, but it becomes like, as a this has always been a limitation, right? If I have my stack running on AWS and Google is coming, Google BigQuery is great, but I can't use it because I have to then deploy a whole stack on or bring everything on Google. So, and if I have to do that just to use one service, I have to then set up a DevOps team. And then I have to take advantage of Azure. Then I have to set up an Azure DevOps team. If I have to take advantage of OCI, and then there are like 50 plus cloud providers like that. Vultr Cloud, OVH Cloud, Nebius is doing great. Nutanix like is coming up with a lot of on-premise. There's a huge, with AI and large LLMs, people
Yeah, I
are
mean,
going.
we still talk
Yeah.
primarily about the big three, but there is like a lot more.
Yes.
There are a lot more, not even the small, but kind of almost medium clouds. With the neo
Yes.
clouds and sovereign clouds and different things that are
Yes.
out there.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. And then all of these new clouds, neo clouds, and smaller clouds, they struggle only one thing: the adoption. People they always get a user which is already having an active infrastructure running on some other cloud. How do you bring that? So migrations always comes into picture. So that's why Fluid Cloud is not a migration tool, it's a cloud cloning platform. So it's like copy paste your infrastructure, have anywhere infrastructure running, just create a copy in another cloud, that's it. And you manage and maintain both of them, and you can even do multiple clouds, multiple sources into one. Doesn't matter. So I can have a real world application where I have my EKS running Kubernetes clusters on AWS. I have BigQuery, which is the backend for my data in GCP, and I have something in Azure. So I can really create an application which is literally a multi-cloud, like different services. And then now, as a strategic decision, I'm moving on to OCI. I can combine all of that in one shot, bring everything into OCI, and give you the terraforms for that. So this is really, really powerful, that I don't need consultants to do that. I don't, the internal DevOps teams, without increasing their effort, I can get that thing done. And then I don't have to learn about OCI Terraform syntax and OCI cloud, anything. So that's really powerful. And we believe in order to increase the adoption, you have to reduce that learning curve of adopting that particular cloud, because that is one of the biggest hurdles for someone to adopt a new cloud. And there are many clouds have multiple offerings which are better than hyperscalers.
Yeah. Well, I think to the point that you made earlier, I think that when like these neo clouds, when someone decides to start one or whatever,
Mhm.
they're trying to solve a specific problem. I mean, they're looking at the existing landscape and they're saying, okay, I see what AWS and Azure and Google are doing.
Yeah.
They don't do this one thing very well. Let me create a neo cloud that does that one thing. Um,
Yeah.
and and so it becomes their pro, or like the one thing, like if that's what you're looking for, then that's why you would use them. The other kind of a related scenario that came to mind was, and I haven't really looked at this, it hasn't been a primary focus of mine in a while, but um around we'll say 2010, uh I was doing a lot of focus on different compliance frameworks, SOX, HIPAA,
Mhm.
GLBA,
Yeah.
PCI, then you throw in GDPR, NIST, and and those as well. It's like they each have their niche, right? Like,
Yeah.
HIPAA's for health and SOX is for publicly traded companies, et cetera. Um, but there's also a lot of overlap. Like if you're looking at it from strictly from
Yes,
like a cybersecurity or data protection perspective, like they have requirements that overlap. And
correct.
and I remember trying to do the work of sort of meshing that all together to say, okay, well, what if you're a company that has to comply with HIPAA and SOX and PCI? Like how do
Hmm.
you sort of look at all of those and say, and part of the challenge with that is kind of a fundamental challenge you have when anytime you're dealing with two different data sets, which is just normalizing the
Yes,
language, which is just saying, okay, well,
yes,
they're calling it this, but we're calling it that. So we need to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
correct, correct. And that is a problem. In fact, in compliance, when I was in Acrix as well, we actually kind of had that. So one particular, like as you said, there are a lot of overlap, right? These controls. So one particular control, which is GDPR, some section 3.2.a, and that same particular policy or that control will be in SOC 2, would be in ISO 27001, but some other section. So we build that overall policy engine, and that if I do that one particular control compliance done, that means I have covered these particular frameworks on that. So yeah, that is something is actually valuable, and there are a lot of frameworks coming up where which is combining those things, but still hard to do when you have multiple clouds, right? And we have brought in that same, because it's my background of CSPM. We have bought an advanced version of CSPM where not just you can actually see those issues, you can also fix them. Because it's a distraction for a DevOps, right? To just work on security and figure out what this policy is all about and how does that relate to my Vulture Cloud. Let's say somebody has deployed things on Vulture Cloud. How do he get any CSPM policies? So we have built that map between the policies. Not just that, we have also built that map between the clouds. So if you have an EC2 instance which says about, hey, your server is not encrypted, that attached volume is not encrypted. Now you have moved from AWS to Vulture Cloud. Vulture also calls it Vulture instances. Now, how does that policy relate to you? Because you are on Vulture, and no other CSPM company supports Vulture Cloud. So Fluid Cloud, what it does, it internally converts that into EC2 and gives you runs the policy evaluation. And we do have policies for Vulture as well separately. So, and we can detect if the encryption is enabled for that Vulture instance or not. So you really get the overall cloud security posture using Fluid Cloud. We just don't want anybody to have any reason to adopt to a newer cloud just because your CISO says, hey, I can't run Wiz, or I can't run Orca security because I can see the security portfolio of my whole infrastructure. Because you're moving to that cloud, you cannot go there. Fluid Cloud
Okay.
can cover that as well.
Well, and so that's I think a good segue to, security and governance are, over the years, they're increasingly more part of the infrastructure rather than something that's bolted on later. I mean, I think pretty much everyone says, built in, not bolted on. And I mean, I'll give you a real world sort of analogy for it that I've been playing around with.
Mhm.
I've been actively house hunting, and there are things that like like if you go if you're looking at a house and you're like say you're looking at an older house, and if it's old enough, maybe it was built without central air or central heating or whatever, and it's like there are solutions for that. I mean, you could have baseboard heating, you could do space heaters, you could put mini splits in the, or whatever. There are solutions, but it's not as good as having it built in. Like, so
Yes.
your bolted on, heating and cooling is always going to be subpar. Um, the same thing has happened to me in, when it comes to house hunting, when it comes to, uh, you know, and this is less important today because Wi-Fi is where it is. But once upon a time, like looking for a house that had Ethernet, cable, runs, throughout the house or whatever. Again, that's a thing that's like you can add it, but that's a pain in the ass. So it's like it's better to have built it from the ground up with that. So in a similar way, when it comes to your cloud, when it comes to your infrastructure, you want the security and the governance to be, baked in as much as possible and
Mhm.
not something that you thought of after the fact. How does Fluid Cloud approach kind of building those controls in from the beginning?
So, I mean, great question. So first of all, Fluid Cloud offers the same security controls you will find. In fact, even there are more, because we are able to also figure out the correlation between those violations. But let's say you are running on one cloud, right? And then you decided to change it. You were in one house, you decided to change the other house, right? You look for all these nuances. Now, when for some reason that particular need requirement is there where you need a security controls baked in the cloud, which is not there, Fluid Cloud brings in that security controls, because once we add a support for a particular cloud for all the services, we have the same security policies across all the benchmarks. We have almost 1800 policies across SOC 2, HIPAA, PCI, ISO 27000, around 36 frameworks, you name it. And what you get best of those are all applied for a bigger hyperscalers. But if you go for a smaller, you get all those same 1800, set for the smaller hyperscaler as well. So really there's no reason to adopt to another example I'll give you. Like, for example, these hyperscalers have something called audit trail, right? Cloud trail events, which are baked in, where anybody who's making what all changes you can actually see. And some of these neo clouds doesn't have that. So Fluid Cloud has built in its own backup and restore. So when we scan your infrastructure, we actually scan everything, discover everything, and we keep a record of it. So it's like a time machine for infrastructure. You see a backup timeline, just like Apple has this time machine, you can restore back in time. So same way, you can see the timeline, what are the changes and all that baked in. So even if you are on-prem or public cloud, doesn't matter anything. We don't treat on-prem differently and public cloud differently. Infrastructure is an infrastructure, right? Whether it is Nutanix, whether it is Vultr, whether it is OCI or AWS. So when you move or when you're maintaining all that, you get everything. All the features for one cloud is across available for all the clouds. So you really don't miss anything. It becomes just a preference of adopting a cloud.
Okay. Kind of going back to where we started talking about the difference between speed and scalability and such versus stability and predictability. It seems like if I had to sort of stereotype the groups, developers tend to want the speed and the flexibility, whereas the IT operations and security teams are more on the stability and control side of things. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you balance those competing priorities in terms of like building a cloud platform?
I mean, this is like Fluid Cloud is very intuitive. Like this works for everything. Even if somebody has infrastructure like background well enough, they can actually interact well. If somebody doesn't have DevOps background, they can also interact with the cloud with our portal, because it's very intuitive. And we have got that constant feedback from all of our users. They said you have made such these hard problems so easy. We don't even feel that this is a problem now. So what Fluid Cloud does is you get everything. Like, we give you all the data points, like absolute visibility of your infrastructure, like everything, cost analysis, security analysis, performance analysis. And also we have a compatibility score. So let's say you are using AWS Aurora DB, right? And you decided to go to Azure. You might think on the top level, hey, this is just an RDS service. Azure also has database service, but you will see there's no equivalent of Aurora. You have to convert your database schema into Postgres, SQL, or regular Postgres, right? And that requires complexity. So we show you that, hey, if you're going to Azure, if you're using that service, we highlight all those unknowns, surprises, so that you don't get surprised when you're moving it. So you really have everything to take your decision. In fact, we have seen some of our customers, they have changed their decision after seeing in Fluid Cloud. They wanted to go to one cloud, but then they decided to go to another cloud, and they had a smoother experience in that cloud. So yeah, the tool has all the data points to cater to the needs all the way from the hands-on developers to all the way up to CIOs or CTOs or head of infra who just want an overview of everything. So yeah, it's
Okay.
it's one tool.
Um, Focusing a little bit on the intuitiveness angle. Um, in the last couple of years, as we've gone, with generative AI and agentic AI, like a
Yeah.
lot of security vendors, went, all in on generative AI, and there's a lot of talk about, well, how that democratizes access, because now someone doesn't necessarily have to be a security expert. They just need to sort of have a vague understanding of what they're trying to ask, and let the AI work it out. Um, as it applies here, when you talk about it being intuitive, what level of sort of DevOps or IT infrastructure knowledge do I need to have to use Fluid Cloud?
Okay. So it's I'll give you an analogy. Like it's like there was last year and the year before there was all this claims that the AI is going to replace developers. Coding is like no developers will be coding. But then what we see now, junior developers are using AI and they're like equivalent to like senior developers or maybe staff level. And but the staff level developers are now able also using that coding and to upgrade their skills to a higher level, right? So if somebody who doesn't have an understanding of cloud, right, it's very similar to how you use your cloud portals. Like somebody coming from VMware environment, they are used to see the VMs and networking resources and then changing things here and there. So that's what we give there. Like you can see the configuration, all those VMs and everything in that, but we want you to adopt to the newer practice. So we give the Terraforms, we help you build that CI/CD pipeline. Um, that might require some DevOps expertise to deploy things, but we also have an integrated workflow where we can integrate with your CI/CD pipeline, or we have a terminal window where just on a click button you can take action. So if there is a security fix needed, we have an action there. We show you what is the fix, where exactly in the config you're changing. You can review it, and if everything is good, just click that button, launch the deployment, and it just goes ahead and does the Terraform apply for you. So basically, what we have done is we are trying to cater to both the audiences who doesn't have the cloud expertise and also to the audience who have cloud expertise. What we have seen, people those who have expertise, they would generally not use the integrated terminal. They would like to download the Terraform and then use their own workflows in their DevOps. But we also have something called MCP server for us. So you use your LLMs. Now Fluid Cloud just becomes one other data point or one more skill set for your LLM to take action on your infrastructure. So we believe in giving superpower, like giving all those tools for people to make their custom workflows what they want to do. We don't want to
Okay.
introduce a new workflow in between.
One of the things you've sort of mentioned a couple of times is, well, you can, if you can deploy this, and then, like, if you change your mind, you can just do this over here. I was thinking about that in terms of, like, that is another one of the, like, significant benefits or pros to where we've evolved to in terms of software defined infrastructure, because you
Mhm.
couldn't do that. Like, when you had to deploy physical routers and physical switches and like, if it's physical, you have to make a decision up front of, like, well, okay, what equipment are you going to
Yeah.
buy? And, like, well, now you've already bought it and you've deployed it, and now you're kind of stuck with it.
Yep.
And when you can just say, okay, well, let's try this, and I'm going to do, okay, well, no, I don't like that. Let's do this instead. And it's all at the push of a button through software. It gives you a lot more options to be able to, like, well,
Mhm.
let's try some things out and see what works and what doesn't work. And we're not sort of married to this solution for the foreseeable future, just because we made a decision in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, if you see the whole premise is like, faster feedback loops. People who grow fast is basically they have a shorter feedback loops. You don't want to like how do you get to the success fast? The way you, the faster you fail, the faster you can get to the success or to your goal, what you want to achieve. And with all this AI, coding, where some of those purpose built AI companies who are able to, like, you can just generate your own custom app without need of any developer, right? And how do you deploy these things in cloud? How do you move things on cloud? So that is the gap which we are filling in. So people have this vibe coding. They have kind of adopted vibe coding. We are trying to bring
Right.
in the trend of vibe deployments. Like, hey, just as long as it works, people are. I mean, people are going crazy. I don't know. I'm a person who believes into quality control first. Like, generally don't give so much control, but the way industry is going towards is, if everything is working fine, right? If a developer is coding or if the LLM is coding, doesn't matter, right? If it is working fine. So the same things, all we are doing is, when we have seen with LLMs generating the infrastructure, right? Because they are generally good in coding, in good in like other aspects of like English language, like generating of reports and optimizing things and building out graphs and visualization. But when it comes to infrastructure, there's very limited in data set available. And there's really, like, we have seen very less accuracy on the generated infrastructure configs. So how will you then automate? If the Terraform generator itself is like 40% accurate, you can never take advantage of that click button or just call an API through your some custom workflow. What we do is, we all make sure, based on whatever the criteria is, we generate 100% accurate Terraform. So it is always that click button. Now, if it is click button, that means LLM or an agent can do the deployment, and you can create a workflow which are never possible of. So you can actually really manage your whole infrastructure, all your portfolio, and give the agent an cap. Hey, make sure my infrastructure never goes beyond $10,000. And as soon as it goes that, it can actually just make some changes on the Terraform and fix it so that your infrastructure comes down below 10,000, which has never been
Yeah.
possible today before this.
Yeah. See, that's powerful. Um, I know we're kind of coming to the end of this. I always ask this, or I generally ask this closing question of the sort of like
Mhm.
forward-looking future. And it's funny because 3 years ago, I would have asked the question, well, 5 years from now, what do you think is blah, blah, blah? And generative AI and agentic AI and everything that has happened in the last 3 years has really kind of accelerated that time frame to the point where I feel like
Yes.
5 years is a ridiculous time frame to ask about. Like nobody knows what 5 years is going to look like.
Yes.
I
Yes.
feel like 3 is kind of the max.
Yeah.
But if you look ahead, we'll just say
Yeah.
ahead.
Yes.
How do you think the role of cloud platforms and infrastructure automation sort of will continue to evolve, with AI, distributed systems, developer expectations?
Yeah. I mean, I feel, you see, today every cloud has like certain nuances, right? Some are costly, some are cheaper, but some have some premium services, some doesn't have. I think what will happen is this will normalize. Like, just like you remember the days back in the days when people used to change numbers, like mobile numbers. I am using AT&T, but then if I have to use Verizon, I have to like change the number, and that was kind of people were avoiding it. And but then Verizon or T-Mobile did not have great service, so then I'm like kind of stuck. But number portability, what it brought in the market, right? Number portability brought in the competition because it improved services. Like, it just now I can have the same number, but I can choose my provider for whatever XYZ reasons. So then my provider, which had bad service, so quality of service
Right.
improved. Customers got more freedom. Customer get more choice, right? So what will happen in the cloud? That cloud portability will also come in foreseeable future, where people people are no longer dependent on one cloud. Everybody's going to use multiple clouds, and then choosing a particular cloud is a strategic decision, or is just a choice of, or a particular advantage for that particular feature. So people will be using multiple clouds. It's just the missing link is this bridge between these clouds. So I definitely see, there, in fact, there are like some complex enterprises like Netflix, Yahoo. They are already like using almost all the cloud providers in the market, like all the major cloud providers. with on-premise. So they have a very sophisticated pipelines. So how are they able to achieve that? Mm, with hundreds of DevOps teams, and also like coming up with multiple number of years. But then with AI, I think that is going to like shoot up. Every company, every solo entrepreneur will be here running a company. We are seeing people running a whole company all by themselves with multiple agents, right? Same way, somebody like when you're managing cloud, doesn't matter how many clouds you are managing. One DevOps can handle like 10 clouds, 10 cloud providers, doesn't matter. So yeah, that cloud portability, that
Well, and
saturation or the normalization will come somewhere.
I think that I hadn't really thought of it, but I think it's a really good point. When you talk about the evolution of mobile and
Yeah.
mobile service and the number portability and stuff, in that once you lose the sort of like vendor lock-in,
Yeah.
it forces the vendors to be
Correct.
better, to compete
Correct.
on a different level. And I think that you have the same thing with the cloud.
Yes.
It's like, well,
Yes.
because you can get kind of lazy or complacent if you're in a
Yes.
situation where once you've signed a customer, they're kind of stuck. It's like,
Yes.
okay, well, now I don't have to go out of my
Correct.
way to make you a happy customer because you don't really have many options, or at least the options you do have are difficult options. Um,
Yeah.
but if it's very easy for you to just leave and switch to another cloud, now I have to do more work to make sure that you're a happy customer.
Correct. Correct. In fact, today, if anybody decides to go on from one cloud to another, right, these cloud providers throw credits. Hey, I can give you another half or 500K of credits. What do you need? Because then they know for sure the more people get addicted to it, the more complex the infrastructure will become. It'll be harder for them to get out. Not anymore. You're not improving your services. You're just keeping that customer just for the sake that tomorrow, on the hope that tomorrow he will not be able to get out. So yeah, may the best cloud win. That's what our thesis is, and that's what we want.
All right, very good. I mean, I think it was a good conversation. I want to thank you
Yeah.
for taking the time to join me.
Thank you, Tony. I think you brought up a lot of points. In fact, some places where you are bringing up the stories, which is very, very relevant. I think those were really good, and I was like, kind of, I might use some of those stories in explaining to some of the customers. So yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you.